And good morning, everyone. Welcoming you to another edition of Game Time with Kenny. Yes, Game Time with Kenny is back in the house, and we are ready to rock and roll this morning. And hopefully, everybody had a good Memorial Day weekend. And as I said, we were not going to do another episode until on Wednesday. And welcome to those audiences around all of the U.S. and internationally, or whoever is watching around the world. And we do appreciate you supporting us, and we love your feedback and comments. So, in the outset of the program, I want to let people know to please subscribe to this channel. Uh, Send this link over to your Facebook friends, Twitter, uh, send an email, text people, however it is, because we'd love to have new audiences come and join us. Uh, I want to, this is going to be a shortened version today, but in the outset, before we get into today's program, I want to say that I do apologize. Um, we were wanting to go ahead and catch everybody from the beginning of the year of what happened this day in sports history up until now, but unfortunately, it looks like the the material that we were looking for. Uh, there's been some issues on the internet, and it is not coming up right now. So um, I do apologize for that. So what we're going to have to do is um, we're going to try to start picking that up starting next week, and and then get back into that. So I do want to apologize for that in advance, and but starting next year, we're going to have to try to see if we can do it on a daily basis. And for those that we could not get for the weekend, because we may not do weekend programming, uh, we will try to save those ones so that we can try to do it during the week between Monday through Friday. And if we need to do another special programming just to catch up on those, we will do that because, as I said before, we don't want to try to go more than 30 minutes in a program. We want to try to keep it simple and try to keep it within 15 minutes to a half an hour on any edition. So, with that being said, uh, let's go to the Stanley Cup Finals. Well, the Stanley Cup Finals began on Memorial Day, and Game 1, the St. Louis Blues beat the San Jose Sharks. Well, one of the two teams that I wanted in the Stanley Cup Final is in, but the other got defeated. I wanted to see the Boston Bruins and the San Jose Sharks. But when you look at the last two games that the San Jose Sharks played against the St. Louis Blues, they outscored 5-0 in Game 5 at home. And then in Game 6 on the road in St. Louis, they got beat 5-1. So in the last 120 minutes of the season for the San Jose Sharks, they got outscored 10-1. And when you give up 5 goals per game in the last two, you're not going to win a hockey game. I mean, it's just hardly impossible to win a game when you give up 5 goals per game. And that's exactly what the San Jose Sharks did. So, what does Logan Couture and the rest of the San Jose Sharks do now? What do they got to think about in the offseason? Well, one of the things that I believe they're going to need to think about is that they need to find a way when they get into the playoffs that they're not giving up 5 goals a game to give themselves a chance to win a hockey game. They have just been simply outplayed in the last 2 games, and the St. Louis Blues do deserve to win the series, and I congratulate them. It is the first time since 1970 that the St. Louis Blues have been to the Stanley Cup Final, and they are taking on the same opponent as they did in 1970, and that was the Boston Bruins. The 1970 team had the player by the name of Bobby Orr. And everybody who was watching that Game 4 of the Stanley Cup Final knows that he got the game-winning goal for the Boston Bruins onto a 4-0 sweep of the St. Louis Blues in 1970. 49 years ago was the last time the St. Louis Blues were in the Stanley Cup Final. And 49 years later, they are playing the same opponent that they did in 1970, the Boston Bruins. The difference is the first 2 games in 1970 was in St. Louis. The first 2 games this time around is in Boston. So if the Bruins are going to sweep the St. Louis Blues, they have to do it in St. Louis on their home ice. Will they get it done? Well, in Game 1 on Memorial Day, when you watch probably the first 30 minutes of that game, it was totally the St. Louis Blues. They were up 2-0, and it just was incredible how they outplayed them, how they out hustled and everything. But right at about the midway point of the second period onto the rest of the game, it was all the Boston Bruins. When they got a goal to make it 2-1, I just changed the momentum of that game because they allowed a goal. Binnington allowed a goal, and that allowed the Boston Bruins to play their game. And when they got back to playing their game, they were the real Boston Bruins. And they came back and they won the game 4-2. So what does the St. Louis Blues do in Game 2? Well, they got to be reminded that if they're going to beat the Boston Bruins, they've got to play a full 3 periods of hockey, 6 minutes, playing the way they did in the first 30 minutes of Game 1. If they play like that for a full 60 minutes, and when they get a lead, and if they're up 2-0, they can't make mistakes. And they got a power play goal in that game. We know there was 1 goal that was unassisted. We know 1 goal came as a result of a turnover. So they've got to find a way to win, and even the series going back to St. Louis. Now, going back since 1970, they have lost 5 straight games in the Stanley Cup Final, all to the Boston Bruins. And they want to win. They don't want to get swept 2 times playing the same team in the Stanley Cup Final. All right, so let's go to the NBA Finals. The NBA Finals will finally begin tonight. Game 1, it is actually in Toronto. So Golden State will not have the home court because Toronto had actually had a better record than the Golden State Warriors by 1 game. So whether Milwaukee won or Toronto won, the Warriors would have been on the road. Toronto finished with a record of 58-24, while Golden State finished with a record of 57-25. So Toronto was better by 1 game, and that's why Toronto will host Game 1 tonight. Well, the featured matchup, we know is going to be Steph Curry against Kawhi Leonard and Kyle Lowry. What do the Warriors do to slow down Leonard, Kawhi Leonard? And what do the Warriors do to slow down Kyle Lowry? Well, I'll tell you, you have to trap them. You have to just play disciplined basketball. When they're getting ready to shoot the 3-point range shots, don't try to jump and try to foul them. Just stay disciplined. Let them get the shot off, but get the hand on the ball and block that shot when they're getting ready to shoot the three-pointer. That's what we need to do to slow them down. Is it possible for the Warriors to win on the road in this series? Absolutely. As I said before, what I believe the one team that was standing in their way of winning the NBA Finals was the Milwaukee Bucks. I still believe that. I believe that the Golden State Warriors can win the NBA Finals. And Toronto, if you're not careful, you may lose a game at home, or maybe two games. If you go down and you get a split, or you're down 0-2, if you're the Toronto Raptors and you got that first two at home, you've got to protect home court. You've got to be able to go up 2-0 going into Oakland and put the pressure on the Warriors to win their two games. But if you allow them to get a split, or they get the first two games and they win the first two, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to come back against the Golden State Warriors and to try to win 4 games. It's not going to be as easy as it was against the Milwaukee Bucks. And a lot of people did not expect the Toronto Raptors to win 4 straight games. But I believe they could have. And the key in that series was Kawhi Leonard and Kyle Lowry. And their bench play really came up big in that series. And how they played Giannis was just amazing. The defense that they were able to put on him and stay consistent, that was the difference. The Boston Celtics couldn't do that after the first game. But the Toronto Raptors, after losing the first two in Milwaukee, they were able to regroup and go back home and win the next two, go back into Milwaukee. And as I said, I believed Toronto could have been the one team that could have won on the road in the series against Milwaukee, and they did. In Game 5, they proved that they could do it. And then in Game 6, they do the same thing at home. They win in the end. And what the Milwaukee Bucks reminded me of is the same thing as the Portland Trailblazers. When you look at the Portland Trailblazers and Seth Curry, the brother of Steph Curry, this is what really, really cost them the series. When you look starting in games 2 through 4, if you look at how Portland played them, they should have won those 3 games. And then you would have forced the defending NBA champions to win the last 3 and go to 7 games, because you would have been up 3-1. But what did they do? When they had a lead of more than 15 points in the second half and close to a 20-point lead, they didn't close them out. They let them get back in the game. Turnovers, free throws, timely 3-point shooting. That's what they did. They allowed them to get back in it. And as a consequence, they lost all 3 games, including games 3 and 4 in Portland. And each of those 2 games went to overtime. Game 3 went to double overtime, and Game 4 went to overtime. It was amazing. When you go back to the Milwaukee Bucks series against the Toronto Raptors, when Toronto won that Game 3 in double overtime, that, I believe, was the turning point of that series, because Toronto got momentum. And even though Giannis fouled out of that game and they did go to double overtime, I believe the Bucks were drained. And that really took a lot of emotion. They were very emotional after that loss. And they could not recover in that series after that loss in game 3. That was the turning point. Or when you go back to the New York Yankees and Boston Red Sox, when they played in the playoffs, Fenway Park, game 4, you remember the hit up the middle? It was probably right about the 4th inning that happened. The curse of the Bambino was broken, and the Boston Red Sox became the first team to come from a 3-0 deficit and to win the last 4 against the New York Yankees, and the curse of the Bambino was broken. So why do I say all this? Because if the Toronto Raptors are going to upset the Golden State Warriors, if they're going to upset them, they've got to be able to do that. If they get a lead against the defending champions, and if it's by more than 15 points in the second half, they got to close them out. They can't be like the Portland Trailblazers and let them get back in the game. If you got them on the ropes, you got to keep them there. You can't let them do the things that they want to do, because they will hurt you if you do. I'm looking for a great NBA Finals matchup here, but don't be surprised if the Golden State Warriors take at least one of the 2 in. Don't be surprised. They've had a long layoff, but I think it was a real good layoff for them. They may come out rusty, probably within maybe the first 3 to 5 minutes of the game, but I believe they're still going to be in the game, because I believe they're going to play great defense that's going to overcome that. But after about 5 minutes into the first quarter, you're going to see the Warriors, I believe, play their basketball. They're going to get timely 3-point shooting, and I'm looking for Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, and if Iguodala is back in the lineup, Iguodala. Now, Kevin Durant doesn't look like he's going to play game 1, but hopefully he'll be back for game 2 when they play game 2 in Toronto, because they'll definitely need him in this series. I think he's going to be a huge factor if he comes in and plays in this series. Because right now, you've got to think about Steph Curry, Klay Thompson. You got to think about them. So that's who Toronto has to think about. But then Golden State has to think about Kawhi Leonard and Kyle Lowry. Those are the 2 factors. So it's going to be a real chess matchup between the 2 teams. And good luck to both teams, and may the best team win. And I'll tell you, I think NBA Finals will be one of the most memorable NBA Finals ever in NBA history. And I'm looking for each game to be a nail biter and come down the wire. Maybe a couple of those games will go to overtime, and then we'll see who really wants it in the end. Well, I want to thank you for watching this edition of Game Time with Kenny. Like I said, I'd like you to please subscribe to this channel. Send this link out to your Facebook friends, social media sites, Twitter, whatever you can do. That would be greatly appreciated. And until tomorrow, I bid you farewell, and you have a great day. Bye for now.